She couldn't have seen anything, of course. She was just standing there asleep. Those thieves would have no knowledge of her strange condition. They would have assumed that she'd caught them in the act. No one is sure what happened next, but it is widely suspected that foul play occurred. One of her slippers was accidentally found in the snow several miles from here. Some assume that she was kidnapped, while others were sure that she'd been killed and the body disposed of somehow. I'm not sure when the ghost first appeared, but it must have been several years later when the clock was removed from the front hall again. She's only visible when the clock is removed, you understand. It's said that she always appears in the place where the tragedy occurred. It's terrible, murmured Susan. Why do you suppose she's always sitting with her head down? Asked Isabel. No one knows, remarked Bertha. She said that she could neither stand nor leave, asked Isabel. Is that what she told you? Bertha inquired. Aye, Susan interjected. She repeated it according to Isabel. It is odd. True. It is strange, Susan stated. Clearly there's a mystery in all of this. Well, there's nothing else for it. We'll just have to speak to her again, Isabel, Bertha remarked. There's no other way. That night, as before, Isabel rose at 3 a.m. and walked down into the hall. The phantom girl sat back against the wall just as before. A soft white light emanated from her in the darkness. It was both comforting and eerie. Bravely, Isabel addressed the girl again. Why do you sit there? She asked. I sit because I cannot stand. I stay because I cannot leave, replied the ghost. Why are you not visible when the clock is in its proper place? The clock is more than just a clock. It hides the spot. What spot? Asked Isabel. A stain? The clock. The clock you cannot see. It hides the place that's hidden from me. You make no sense at all, Isabel fumed with impatience. You speak in riddles. Speak plainly. The clock. You cannot see. It hides the place that's hidden from me. Isabel merely shook her head. Confused, she paced the floor for several moments, trying to make sense of the ghost's riddles. In time, the apparition disappeared completely, and Isabel found herself alone in the hall once more. The next morning, she told Susan all that she'd heard. Susan considered the ghost's riddles, shaking her head frequently. Suddenly, her face went white. She sat forward in her chair, her hand covering her mouth. Have mercy, it can't be, she began. What? Isabel peered into the woman's face curiously. She said the clock hides the place that hides her. Old Bertha said the girl's slipper was found miles from here, but that was just her slipper. The girl isn't gone. Don't you see? She's still here. I mean... Isabel released the breath that she'd been holding. I mean the clock, it hides where she is. Susan looked Isabel in the eyes, meaningfully. She's still there. In the wall. Who would do such a thing? Isabel exploded. Aye, indeed, who would hide a girl in a wall? And how would they get away with it? Isabel paused, realizing the rudeness of her next question. I mean, wouldn't it smell? How was it not discovered? Oh, I don't know. Susan's head moved side to side very slowly. They sat quite still for several moments before Susan seemed to come to life. She took Isabel's hand and looked into her face almost imploringly. You know what you must do, right? Tonight you must ask her. You must confirm if she says it's so. What we think. Then we must open the wall, Isabel answered flatly, as though there could be no argument. Aye, Susan nodded. Been there long enough. At 3 a.m., Isabel opened her eyes and found herself once again in the front hall, across from the wall where the clock once stood. Within moments, she saw the little ghost appear opposite her. Isabel began in the usual way. Why do you sit there? She asked. I sit because I cannot stand. I stay because I cannot leave. Where's your resting place? Far from here? I think you know. You do. Behind the wall. I am entombed. Isabel tried to keep her voice steady as she asked her next question. And who put you there, pray tell? Robbers? The workmen came to fix the clock. They came and took it all away. They saw the wealth and began to plot. They They planned to rob the house some way. Isabel almost snapped her fingers. That made perfect sense, she paced, speaking as she walked. Of course they did. They'd seen the house. They knew its layout. They planned to do it right before the clock came back. Great-Grandma Julia would have insisted to be back in time for Christmas. They decided to break in on Christmas Eve. Then they could reinstall the clock on the morning of Christmas Day. Of course! They'd be eliminated as suspects. Who robs a house and then returns to it the next day? But what about the girl? They didn't expect you, though, did they? That part wasn't planned. They didn't know about your sleepwalking. The girl's face was turned downward once more. But how did they? How did they hide you? Where? In the wall? She asked finally, almost fearful of the answer. The ghost looked up at this. They shared a long, even look. Their faces were so similar, their ages so close. They might have been friends, cousins, sisters even. Finally, the ghost answered her. This house is old. It's not like new. There is no wall, but another room. You see me here, but not inside. Within you'll find the place I hide. A second later, she vanished. Another room, murmured Isabel. There isn't a wall at all. It's another room. There was a long pause as she considered this. How would they have known that there was a room behind the clock? There were workmen, the architects of the house. From the darkness of the hall, she heard the little ghost again. Tell ye true, there were not two. Came for me that evil night. But three came in to thieve and bury me. That work or light. A third man? Isabel stepped forward. Another workman? Another man who'd come to fix the clock? One who knew the wall was deep. No workman knows this house so well. Only heirs are privy thus. It was his hand that fell. Whose hand? Isabel demanded. If it was a relative of mine, I have a right to know. The heir. Old Walter Blood, the only male, the only son. And then it was like a dam breaking inside of her. The old story, it all made sense, all of it. All of it going back to when she'd first heard about her grandmother's Uncle Colin. All of it coming back to her in the oddly vivid way that a child recalls the stories of a long-dead relative. She remembered Grandma Rose's references to Colin's works. His nervous twitches, his inability to relax, the number of brandies he'd drink in one sitting, his obsession with the clock remaining in its rightful place. In the front hall, the way he'd become angry if anyone started snooping around the house. It all made sense now. She recalled the hush talk about him, his gambling debts, his troubles with alcohol and women, the way he'd gone to ask for it in advance on his inheritance all those years ago, and his parents' refusals. She imagined him planning it all out, him deciding to call in the workmen, men he'd probably promised a cut, if all went according to plan. The room behind the clock chosen to hide the loot. But one question remained. How would they retrieve the stolen items if the clock was back in its place? There's another way in, Isabel said out loud. Of course, there'd have to be another way in so that he could go in, get what he needed, and get out without raising suspicion. And people never looked right under their noses. Never. That's why they never found the body. She had walked some distance from the wall in her thoughts, but she stopped and turned back suddenly. Walking quickly toward it, she put her hand on the wainscoting. Where are you? She asked in a shaky whisper. I can't help you get out if I don't know the way in. The way in is here. Just here. The light appeared glowing softly on the wall, just a few feet from where she stood. Pull the latch and the way is clear. She moved forward toward the light, allowing the figures to roam along the grooves in the woodwork. Suddenly she felt it. There was a small latch, invisible to the eye. Her first instinct was to pull on it to open the door, but being practical, she knew she must wait until sunrise. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to see anything, even with the spirit's glow. Wake me, will you? She asked the ghost. At daybreak? I can't see much now. In response, the light glowed more warmly for a moment and then went out. She noted the place on the wall, then moved into the front hall. She lay down on one of the several sofas. Just as the sun peeked over the horizon, she woke with a start. It was just light. No one was stirring. She rubbed her eyes, rose, and walked toward the wall. She moved her hand along the wainscoting, searching for the lever that she'd found before. She fitted her fingers into the grooves of the wood with a light that shone softly a few hours earlier. Then suddenly her fingers caught on what felt like a bent metal nail. She wiggled this curiously, her thumb finally knocking it loose. There was a sigh of stale air and a creak of ancient hinges as the hidden door made itself known. She pulled forward on the wooden door, suddenly timid. It was very dark inside. She knew she must enter to see what she must see. But she hesitated, fearfully, at the edge of the dark mouth that yawned before her. "Not here," the little ghost whispered it reassuringly. "I'm with you." A soft light radiated in the darkness, glowing brighter by degrees. Slowly, Isabel entered the room. The air was sour, dank, stale, heavy. She felt sick in her stomach, but she moved forward. She had to. She felt that. This little girl, this ghost, was dependent on her in some way. She moved further into the casement. This had once been a private parlor of some sort. There were no windows except in a small adjoining closet. There were plaster walls covered in fabric, with wainscoting underneath. There were several small couches, a mahogany table, and a trunk pressed against one wall. A trunk. Normally, an item like a trunk would have gone completely unnoticed. She would have scanned the room and made no note of such a thing. But there, in the room, the trunk took on a dark, oddly sinister quality. The words of the little ghost echoed in her consciousness suddenly. "I sit because I cannot stand. I stay because I cannot leave." The key lay on top of the trunk. Isabel moved forward and took the key between her fingers. She contemplated its significance, what it could mean. A heavy, hitching emotion rose in her chest, and she found that she could hardly breathe. A tear stung her eye as she leaned down to put the key into the lock. She turned it roughly, pulling the rusted arm out of the sleeve. She was torn between two impulses: throw open the chest in one swift motion or run away. She found that she could do neither. She was afraid to flee, afraid to look inside the trunk. She sat there on her knees for nearly a quarter of an hour. Then, turning sideways, she allowed herself to fall limply against the wall. She ran her hand over the lid of the chest, trying to will herself into action. She must do this thing. The servant would be downstairs soon. What would they say to her if they saw her in there? She took a deep breath, gaining resolve. Then she took hold of the corner of the chest and pulled upward. She didn't turn her head at first. She rose to her feet and took a step away from the chest before turning. Inside, the girl's head was down, her face pressed against her knees. Her hair, once brown, had gone ashy gray. Skeletal shoulders arched downward over bony legs, covered in what remained of a dress. Isabel scanned the small body and noted that her feet were bare. Why had they removed her slipper? Isabel looked at one of the feet, pressed flat against the wall of the chest, and then she understood. The slippers might have allowed her to make noise. She could have kicked her slippery feet against the inside of the trunk and made enough noise to alert someone outside of her presence there, which could only mean she was still alive. Isabel whispered. Horror slowly spread across her features. She looked at the horrid visage again. There were tethers inside the chest for securing items before travel. The men had used these tools to keep her largely immobile. Her mouth, all skeletal, was still gagged with the remains of a lump of cloth. Suffocated. Or starved, Isabel murmured. And all the while she could hear the passage of time. Seated here behind the clock that counts the hours. That's what she said. How long did she wait here for the rescue that never came? She looked around the room, seeking the little ghost absently. How long did you wait? A week? 10 days? A fortnight? Just then a click sounded behind her. An adjacent hallway was revealed, illuminated by a rosy glow of dawn's first light. It was lined with several old burlap sacks. Stepping forward, Isabel gingerly opened a sack a few inches. Inside the first bag, there were several boxes wrapped in brown paper. Christmas gift. They must have hidden them in this hallway before they disposed of her. She looked over at the girl again, sadly, before speaking. You must have planned to hide them in here all along. But you changed things, didn't you? They couldn't risk coming in here to get the gifts with you tied up in there. Later they wouldn't come in because they were too disturbed by the thought of what they'd done. But there still had to have been another doorway. If the clock was put back, they would have no way to access what they'd taken, dead girl or not. She began moving the burlap sacks. She was sure the answer lay in the short hallway. She found her answer in the far corner. There she found a small door, knob hidden by some loose wall fabric. She walked closer and turned the handle slowly. The creaking door hinges grinded as the door opened by degrees. She couldn't believe her eyes. She recognized the table barring her exit almost immediately. She was in the parlor adjacent to the front hall. The table's location and height masked the other door handle. How often had she walked through that parlor, unaware that there was a doorway into another room right under her nose? She had no idea the door existed. She doubted anyone else did either. She closed the door resolutely, putting her hand against it, sealing it once more. "Oh, I'd say that you fouled that up, Uncle Colin," she began. "Oh, you killed a child and got away with it, that's true. But you did it for nothing. You never got your hands on any of these treasures either. Poetic justice, I would say." She would tell Susan everything when she woke. It would be soon, she was sure. Isabel walked through the short hallway into the main part of the hidden room. Out of habit, she scanned it, finding a small clock lying face up on the table. She walked toward it, noting its cracked face. It must have been knocked down in a struggle, she mused. The time on the clock face read 3 o'clock. A great heaving thing rose in Isabel's chest as she realized that the clock's face. So many years trapped inside. "But you're free now. But you're free now," she announced through tears. Isabel made her way towards the door, stepped into the front hall again. She paused briefly, turning one last time. "You need not sit, for you can stand, and you need not stay, for you can leave." Then, smiling, she turned on her heels and went to wake Susan. Isabel couldn't be sure, but she thought she heard the jingle of laughter as she made her way up the stairs. The morning sun made its way through the curtains as winter dawn came on fully. It was time to get up.
Hey guys, I'm Carly Kloss, and I just created my own website with Wix.
Go to Wix.com to create your...
This is the audio diary of James Goldstein. And, there's been an event.
"James, what in the world are you doing? You realize as soon as Sammy catches you with one of those things, he's gonna smash it to pieces."
Robert, they're tools for us to use, and in a catastrophe, I think this is the best thing to do, is to record ourselves on one since they haven't put a telephone down here for us. Each of those notes we sent up the tube is probably too covered in ink before it gets to the top floor. Someone's gotta find a new way to send for help.
Right. As soon as you get into the orchestra room to reach the tube, Sammy Lawrence is gonna snatch it out of your hands and smash it to pieces.
The man speaking is Robert Kirk. He and I are the lead songwriters for the Joey Drew Studios. And 6 hours earlier, the ink machine that Mr. Drew had installed upstairs, what he's called the life's blood of the studio, The ink itself has broken, and the ink that's leaked down from up there has trapped us here. The ink machine has had a leak since installation, and at times the ink would build up in front of the door. A few times a month, we had to use the pump that Mr. Drew had installed to drain the ink back into the system and allow us to go home. But today, the ink pump wouldn't turn on, no matter how much we would flick the switch in Mr. Lawrence's office off and back on.
And Sammy was a real prick about us going in and out so much, searching for a solution as well. The grumpy jerk went and had us moving files and junk around the whole floor looking for those power reset switches. Of course, Mr. Drew was nuttier than a fruitcake and hid the damn things. When we finally found them, those things wouldn't reset the breaker. Best guess from us here is that the ink machine itself is on the fritz, which means the whole building is out of power. Doesn't do much for the 30 or so of us poor schmucks that are stuck down here. The outlets for the fans don't even work, so we're like cooked sardines crammed into a music hall. If you ask me, for whatever reason they put in that ink machine upstairs, it's not worth all the trouble it's been given the whole studio. But after a day of work here, being trapped until what I can only assume is late at night, is killing me, and it's starting to look like we're going to be spending the whole damn night down here.
If anyone does find this tape, or if anyone is still in the office upstairs, we'd appreciate a quick call to the police, please.
Yeah, good luck. I think we're getting out of here, at least until morning.
Well, I pray that we can get out soon, Robert.
Hey, this thing's working right. Okay, so, this is Robert Kirk. James, I hope you don't mind me using this until you get back, but I want to say a few things. Like, one, for God's sake, I'm starving. We've been in here for over 24 hours now. I think some of the folks here have already lost their minds. So Sam's become this dictator director. He believes that just because he can hand that record off the wall to Mr. Drew, he gets to call the shots around here. And a man pays tributes to the gods pay tribute to him, right? At least that's the garbage that he keeps spewing and why he's still in charge. Personally, I'm a fan of martial law. The order is at least keeping the boys from turning this place into Lord of the Flies. He stopped people from going in and out of his office at all to try that pump lever again. I think that we're all searching for a way to get out of here, you know? So we wander in, we wander out, and we keep hope that the power must have come back on. If we switch the thing on, maybe it'll drain the hallway. I mean, I can't be the only one with an empty stomach, too, right? We haven't eaten all day. Makes me wish I didn't finish off my lunch yesterday, that's for sure.
What are you doing?
Just recording. I'm thinking that it's going to end up being my last will and testament or something.
I'm not laughing, Robert. It's nowhere near that bad. And besides, we got a new reel down the tube for us to record for. So, they know we're down here.
Any word about what we're going through? Are they getting the cops or the fire department or something?
I'm sure they're working on it, man. I mean, they know we're here. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent another animation reel, right? They just haven't gotten a chance to bring us up yet.
Oof. God, Drew is nuts. Yeah, he knows that we're down here, and he still gives us work to do. Couldn't even have a sandwich sent down the tube? Joey Drew is a slave driver.
Yeah, you're not wrong there. Come on, though. We might as well work before we lose our heads further. It'll keep your mind off food for a minute. Hey, Rob. How's this for a title? The Devil's Food Cake. They're in the recording phase now. And you can hear our song for the new episode. Devil's Food Cake. Devil's Food Cake. Turns out the sound equipment is getting power, but not the pump just yet. As a personal note, I think this is the first song we've ever composed that was written by candlelight.
I'm dying, James.
Come on, we weren't going to go into that.
No, if there's one thing I want to record, I think it's that. I think we need it to be known that Joey Drew is fucking killing us.
Just relax.
No, I can't relax. It's been 3 days. I'm starving to death, and upstairs, they haven't done a thing, not a damn thing to get us out of here.
I know, but you think we can send this recording up to them to help us with you cursing to high heaven about the company? Mr. Drew wouldn't...
The fuck, Mr. Drew? You hear me? You batshit asshole. Fuck you, and fuck you too, James. You realize that you have faith in this guy, the delusional madman who put us here, and you're willing to starve to death for him down here. You have a lot of fucking hope until you're nothing but a pile of bones in the corner.
It's not going to get that bad.
Oh yeah? Prove it. Tell me how we could live one more day. We need food and water, James.
It'll be okay. Just, you heard about Jacobs.
Jacobs, yeah, Jacobs. Yesterday the fool was trying to kill himself.
No, he wasn't. I think he was onto something. Okay? I was listening to Mr. Lawrence talk about his idea. He thinks that the ink might be edible in small doses.
God. Oh, God, is that... Well, that shit's all over your hands and your face? I thought you were just walking onto more of those leaks.
Listen, it's not poisonous.
It's not... James, listen to yourself. It's been 3 days. 3 days, and you're trying to drink black ink? Get a hold of yourself. You'll be dead faster than you could starve yourself out.
No, you're right. I don't know what's come over me. I don't know what I'm doing.
Get a grip, okay? We're not gonna let that Sammy Lawrence asshole get us acting all crazy as him. And listen, turn this thing off. It's been a week. Still no sign of us getting out of here. Those assholes upstairs even sent us another animation reel to work with. James and I wanted to refuse, but Sammy scum-sucking Lawrence came into the room. He made us get started. The guy looked wild when I saw him. Ink all over him from head to toe. He lost his shirt. He just looked like a shadow walking into the office. It almost scared me right out of my skin. Must be all the ink that he's been eating. I don't think I could blame the guy. James broke me finally. I got far too hungry, I had to have something. I couldn't just give up, so I finally started, The stuff tastes awful, but at least my stomach wasn't empty. Makes you crazy lightheaded, though. Passed out for, I think, a few hours after I had my first handful, but I could drink the stuff on my own now. I'm not dead either, which I feel like is a good thing. Maybe if I drink my way out of here, you won't need that pump anymore.
Mr. Lawrence has been given a copy of The Illusion of Living from down the tube with today's animation reel. Mr. Lawrence also got some other papers. He rushed back to his office with them before we could all see, but he was telling us to keep searching for the illusion of life. Mr. Lawrence is doing a great job of leading us. He discovered that the ink could keep us alive and fed when we all thought we were goners. So, if he has an idea about how to get us out, and that we should just keep trusting in Bendy and the illusion of life, then who are we, really, to argue? The place here gets darker as the days go on, though. It's slowly being covered with more and more ink. The ink machine upstairs still hasn't been fixed, but I think we're all coming to grips with the new life down here. I do hope I get up to my wife again, though. Poor girl must be worried sick. Oh well.
I was just listening to the last recording on here. I haven't seen James in days. It's been weeks. But he was in the room again, and he must have recorded on this thing, right? There's ink all over it. I can't figure out where it's gone. I think he might have become like Okay. I know you're not gonna believe me when I tell you about all this, okay? It's not like we've been down here forever. We're not seeing the outside. Even no one of outside knows you're alive. I can do things to people. I don't know if it's done this to James or if I'm not alone here, but Sammy's lost his goddamn mind. Yesterday, he starts walking around with these damn bendy cutouts. How he got so many of them while he's down here, I have no fucking idea, but he put them around the place in the recording studios, and he says that it lets him watch us. It'll make us feel safe, but hearing him say that made me feel uncomfortable. Knowing that some bug-eyed cartoon characters watching is making me feel even more uncomfortable. But everyone was nodding and taking in his words like they liked it. I mean, maybe I'm the asshole here, right? I feel like maybe I'm losing my mind. What do they know that I don't? You know? Sammy kept going on about drinking the ink 3 times a day. It's required. Keeps up this illusion of living. This book that he found for me. Joey Drew books of the illusion of living. Better it's the ink. And the thing is, I think the ink's going to everyone's head. I can't hardly stomach this stuff. See, I don't have a choice. I have a few drops a day. That's all I can stand. I watched some of the boys come from the recording studio and they were bathing in this stuff. One of them rose out of the ink when I came by, the leak, like Bela Lugosi out of the Dracula movies. Nearly shat myself, swear to God. He just shuffles out of there and slapped an inky set of hands on my back. And I could see speckles of white from his teeth as he smiled at me and continued out of the room, leaving a trail of ink behind him as he dripped. This place is a madhouse. It's becoming a living hell, and it's because Sammy fucking Lawrence is leading us there. And what's sad is that we're all following him. We're all following him like goddamn lambs to the slaughter. Okay, I'm gonna send this up next chance I can. I'm bringing this tape to the tube and I'm sending it to the surface. If you find this, okay, please take it to the cops or the army or the police, the fire department, something, because oh my God, I don't know what's happening. See, Sammy's he's worshiping the book that the fucking the illusion of life, the illusion of living book. It's like a fucking Bible to him. He talks about the ink machine as if it's this great being, and that Bendy, no, get this, that Bendy is the Lord and the Savior of us all, that a fucking cartoon character is gonna save us from the hell that we're trapped in. Can you believe that? He's gone off the rails, hard, and everyone's taken to following him. I saw him. Okay, I saw them. They're different. They've lost everything that makes them individual. I swear, I thought I could almost hear James's voice among them. So they all started singing that song for him, for their god, the Bendy song, that lighter side of hell. I didn't touch that goddamn song. He wrote that, James and I. It's like listening to him sing a religious song, and before them, with his hands held high in the air, with his head behind one of those bendy cutouts that was strapped to his face like a mask, Sammy fucking Lawrence was leading him. He's so far off the deep end that he can't see the shore anymore, and he's been drawing these symbols everywhere. The ink from the walls gives life, he says. The illusion of living. We're all just part of the illusion of living, and I'm afraid he's gonna start killing some of us off. You know, if the ink hasn't already. Someone needs to help us. Please, we need to get out of here. I need help. They all need help. If someone gets this message when it reaches the surface, please send help.
We found a traitor of the god, our savior. He has betrayed us. He wishes us damned by the shadows and not saved by them. Our demon in the ink demands sacrifice, and he must be appeased. Our Lord must be praised, and for his love must we give thanks. Then please, accept this offering, this lamb from our flock. Though he has been led astray, welcome him into your shadow.
I said, can I get an amen?
You need a logo. Why not make it today? With Taylor Brands, you can get your own professional logo.
Hello, readers. My name is, well, unimportant. I'm here to share a story of mine that I've kept bottled up for quite some time. I'm a believer in the uncanny and weird, as long as it is within the boundaries of reason. Even so, I can always explain the day's events to myself and understand them, no matter how odd. My mind craves logic and order, but the following events have gone. I can't explain them away at the end of the day. I'm not even sure what actually happened. I'm left with a bunch of what-ifs. I can say with some certainty that it may have been a vivid hallucination or a very clever deception. Either way, I feel I need to disclose my tale, if for no other reason than to get it off my chest. The following occurred in the autumn of 2010. That's as specific as I will be. I live in a small but lively town in Massachusetts. The winters are cold and the summers are hot, but fall, to me, feels just right. Being just shy of the proper drinking age and never having interest in such things anyhow, I found other activities to occupy my weekends, and weekdays, for that matter. I've always had a passion for the paranormal. It fascinates me, even to this day, with nothing better to do with my raging case of insomnia. I spend some of my nights investigating the local cemeteries with my friends. You could call me a paranormal investigator of sorts, but I saw it as more of a hobby. Half the time, my friends and I would goof off anyway. The only time that we became dramatically serious was when there was a lot of paranormal activity taking place. Now, this didn't happen all that often, but when it did, we transformed from friends hanging out and having a good time into instant professional ghost hunters. I might have even pursued it as some sort of career choice, had the following not taken place. I can tell you for certain that I won't investigate a cemetery again for as long as I live. It was a night like any other for myself. I was bored, I couldn't sleep, and I felt a need to do something outdoors. I called a few of my friends and asked if they wanted to investigate one of the local cemeteries, one that tended to have more activity than the others. I was able to convince 2 of them to come with me. The others, whom I called, were angry that I'd woken them up. I didn't realize that it was already midnight. Anyway, the 2 friends that I did rope in met me at the cemetery. It took us each roughly half an hour to walk there, and even though we all lived in opposite sides of town, the cemetery was smack dab in the center of town, making the location convenient for all of us, considering that we were without transportation. After an hour of investigating and goofing off, my friends left. There was little to no activity. The place was dead, no pun intended. Maybe a little intended. I stayed behind. I figured that I would take a walk through the cemetery a few times in an attempt to become tired before heading home. I started walking about when I noticed something. Before I go into details, I must describe to you the layout of the cemetery. It was quite large, overall. There were 2 sides, divided by a small street right off the main road. Each side had a stone wall that ran along the entire length of the graveyard. It came up to my waist, and only broke up where the 2 main entrances were, one for each side. On one side was nothing but graves. The other side, the one that I was walking on, had graves, a stone tomb, and a small wooden shack. The shack was where the gravedigger kept his shovels and other tools for the trade. What I had noticed while walking towards it was a light illuminating the inside. I didn't even know there was any electricity that ran to the shack. I figured that the gravedigger was working late tonight, it being around 2 a.m. at this point. I looked around, and I could make out a freshly made 6-foot deep hole near the shack, big enough for a coffin. This was odd to me. This graveyard was a popular one. with at least 5 new headstones added each month. Every time the cemetery became full, some town workers would cut down some trees and extend them. The only thing that struck me as strange was the hour. I had only seen the gravedigger work during the day. A huge, gaping hole in the ground is a dangerous thing to come across in the middle of the night. This was enough to arouse my curiosity. So I decided to see what the old man was up to. I crept over quietly, making my way to a cracked window located on the side of the shack. This way I could hear what was going on inside. I knew about the window because I was the one who cracked it a year previous on one of my investigations. My friends and I were throwing rocks up in the air, trying to repeat the results of an urban legend that was passed around town. See, it was the equivalent of our Bloody Mary. It was said that if you throw a rock straight up into the air and stand completely still, you can hear screams of a woman by the name of Imala before the rock hits the ground. Imala was a resident in the town during the 1940s. She died while strolling down this very street, during the newer side of the cemetery's construction. A gravestone fell on her head while being moved to its proper location by a small crane. The gravestone was her late husband's, who she allegedly murdered just 3 weeks before her death. Instead of hearing a scream, I heard the shatter of glass a few yards away. I had broken the window on the side of the shack. Looking back now, I don't know why I believed in that urban legend anyhow. I think it was fabricated to fool kids into, well, hurting themselves. In any case, I approached the window and peered in. The gravedigger was not there. However, void of life the shack was not. Inside the shack, to my surprise, were 9 men. 9 men standing at a long wooden table, wearing tattered blue shrouds. The light I had seen was not a light at all, but what looked like several oil lamps. The men were eating what appeared to be a reddish stew. It looked gross, and every man cringed while eating it, except for the tall man sitting at the end of the table, and the 2 sitting on either side of him. What was this? Some sort of town meeting? I crouched down and listened as the tall man began to speak. "Hello, young newcomers. Are you ready to start your trials?" He spoke with a firm voice. It resonated throughout the shack and beckoned even myself to listen. "Yes," the 6 men sitting across the table shouted in unison. "Trials? What trials?" The tall man spoke again. "Good. Bloodlight Collis will explain the rules." I could only assume that the man to his right was Collis, as he explained everything. My memory has always served me well, so I was able to recall everything that he said, as unnerving as it was. It seemed that the men in the shack were part of a cult called the Bloodlights, though they never referred to it as a cult. That's just what I gathered from what I heard. The trials were more of a game consisting of 2 teams that would disperse to either side of the cemetery. The tall man was the leader of the Bloodlights, and this game was his way of initiating new members. The winners would be accepted as full-fledged Bloodlights. At this point, I couldn't really believe what I was hearing, but I kept listening. Whether it was out of curiosity or fear of the men hearing me, if I attempted to leave, I was immobile. Collis continued explaining the rules. Each team consisted of 4 members, 3 blood runners, and 1 blood baron. It seemed that the newcomers would be the runners, and the 2 men standing at the end of the table, with the tall man, would be the barons. There was one more participant to be discussed. The tall man, the one that was leading the trials, he was the blood keeper. He was not on either team, but the most important part of the game. He kept and guarded what was referred to as the blood. I thought that maybe he referred to the red amulet that hung from the tall man's neck, because with every mention of the word blood, he kept firmly clasping the amulet between his fingers and closing his eyes, almost as if partaking in a silent prayer. The job of the runners was to retrieve the blood from the blood keeper. The barons acted as coaches that would strategize with the runners. It actually sounded like a fun game that I could partake in myself. So far, everything seemed simple. Until the blood keeper spoke again. "With every wound, there is blood. With every drop of blood, there is light. Without death, there can be no light. I had no idea what any of what he said meant, but it was captivating in a morbid kind of way. The Bloodkeeper stepped over a tall cupboard at the back of the shack that I hadn't noticed before. He opened it. Inside was a young woman, bound and gagged, wide eyes open, futilely attempting to scream for help. My heart sank. This was far beyond your normal run-of-the-mill cult ritual. I needed to find help. What if they heard me? I was frozen with fear, and I could not take my eyes away. The Bloodkeeper spoke again. Repeat after me. The blood of light can only be seen in death. The recruits chanted. The blood of light can only be seen in death. Just then the Bloodkeeper took a large red dagger out of his cloak, grabbed the woman, and all I could think was that this couldn't really be happening, could it? He pierced the knife into her gut. The others repeated, the light of blood can only be seen in death. The Bloodkeeper stabbed her again. The light of blood can only be seen in death. I could see the life leaving the woman's face as she tried to yell once more with such an ashen and broken expression. The Bloodkeeper thrust the knife deeper into the woman's stomach. The light of blood can only be seen in death. Right before she lost consciousness, she turned and looked directly at me. She looked indescribably hurt, both physically and mentally, as tears began to soak her face. At that moment, I couldn't even explain to you how knotted my stomach was. I immediately threw up right next to the shack, and luckily no one heard me. The Bloodkeeper made one final blow into the already dead girl's neck. The others uttered one last time, the light of blood can only be seen in death. If I had anything left in my stomach to vomit, I would have done so again. What scared me the most was the conviction with which he stabbed her. I could see it in his face. It was almost as if there was a reason behind each wound that he dealt, or at least to him there was. I stood there paralyzed with fear and watching the killer get up and reach into a brown satchel that he was wearing over his shoulder. He pulled out 3 empty vials. He then continued to fill the vials with blood that was dripping from his dagger. And I realized that blood in the game was not his amulet, but indeed actual human blood. The Bloodkeeper finished explaining the rules to the newcomers. There are 3 vials. This gives, at most, 3 of you the opportunity to be accepted as bloodlights. I noticed Callus laugh under his breath, as if 3 being accepted was unheard of. If you see a runner from the opposite team, what do you do? The newcomers answered together. Kill! If you see a civilian, what do you do? They answered once more. Kill! I dry heaved for a solid 20 seconds trying to vomit. If I wasn't in danger before, I was now. I should never have come here. God, even if you exist, please get me the hell away from here, I thought to myself. The Bloodkeeper spoke one last time. You must stop at nothing to attain one of these vials. All others will be sacrificed. Your thirst for blood must be as strong as your will to live. Just then the 9 men walked towards the shack door to leave and begin the games. I ran as fast as I could for the wooded part of the cemetery and hid behind the largest tree I could find. I did not want to wind up like that girl in there. I thought to myself as I caught my breath. Pull yourself together. You need to find a good opportunity to escape without being noticed. It shouldn't take much. I gathered my nerve and peeked out from behind the tree. Standing right there, not 10 feet away, were 3 of the runners, and Carlos facing me. I darted my head back behind the tree. Did they notice me? I peeked again and noticed their eyes were shut, and they were standing eerily still. They must have to do this before the game starts to let the Bloodkeeper hide himself from their immediate view. I was lucky. Maybe this was my chance to make a run for it. But I thought too soon. I heard Carlos shout, "Let the trials begin!" My heart was racing faster than you could have ever imagined. My fate was in the hands of the game now. I could see Carlos and the 3 blood runners in the reflection of a small puddle nearby my hiding tree. It had rained the previous night. They seemed to be strategizing. My heart was pounding out of my chest, so much so that I was actually afraid they might hear it. I stood there behind my tree, becoming exponentially nervous, and with each and every beat, I listened to their nearly inaudible whispers as the men conspired. Then, when I couldn't take it any more, silence cut through the brisk night air, like a bloodkeeper's dagger through that poor woman's neck. It sent the coldest chill down my spine. Why couldn't I hear them? Did they leave? I was too frightened to glance around the corner and see. I looked at the puddle. I didn't see their reflection. What do I do now? I was not going to run through the woods. Not only would the loud crunch of autumn leaves compromise my location, but I have seen too many horror movies to know that wouldn't be a good idea. I also couldn't run through the cemetery. What if a blood runner spotted me? Or a baron? Even worse, what if the blood keeper saw me? I didn't want to think about it. I calmed down as much as I could, given my current situation, and mustered up enough courage to peer around the tree. They were gone, or at least nowhere to be seen. I looked around and weighed my options. To the left of the cemetery, after seemingly endless rows of headstones, was more woods, and a lot of briars. This was not a viable possibility. Straight ahead were more headstones in the shack. There was no way I was going to hide in the Bloodlight's den with the dead girl, even if I could make it over there. To the right was even more headstones, but not as many. I squinted as I looked off into the distance. Oh, there was a tomb off to the right of the graves. It was maybe 100 yards away. I wouldn't be able to waltz over there without being noticed, but maybe, just maybe, I could jump from tree to tree until I made it there. The woods did wrap around the whole cemetery, right up to the back side of the tomb. Should I risk it? Or should I stay behind this tree, cowering in fear until it's all over? The latter option was looking pretty good, but I knew if I stayed there long enough, one of them would find me. My mother was right. She always told me to stay away from the cemetery at night. Do you know the kinds of people that hang out there? She would say. She didn't know the half of it. I took a deep breath and braced myself. Without as much of a second thought, I dashed in the direction of the tomb and hid behind the closest tree I could find. I gathered my wits and looked around the graveyard. There was still no one to be seen. I sprinted to the next tree. I took another quick glimpse of my surroundings. The coast was clear. Before I could prepare myself to run to the next tree, I felt myself being lifted off the ground. In that moment, my body went numb in utter panic. The next thing I knew, before I could even think about what was happening, I was atop a tree branch, looking directly at a blood runner. I didn't scream. I didn't try to get away. My blood ran cold, and I sat still in terror, accepting what was happening. I exhaled what I thought would be my last breath, but just as I did, the blood runner spoke. What's your name? I was too in shock to say a word. Come now, what's your name? He spoke more firmly this time, and I noticed that he had somewhat of an accent. His voice was also deep and brash, like one's voice might sound after many years of drinking hard liquor and smoking cigarettes. I still couldn't find it in me to answer him. Look, I noticed you at the window over there, eavesdropping. If I wanted you dead, I could have pointed you out then. I want you to help me. Help you? Is all I could say. Yes. I'm going to use you to my advantage. I take it you know what we're doing here, and you know the rules of the game. I nodded my head, still in shock. Good. With you, I may be able to turn the tables and get the upper hand. My mind was racing, but I listened intently on what he was saying. See that tomb over there? He pointed at the tomb I'd been on my way to, before I was lifted off the ground into a tree. I nodded once more. That's where the blood keeper is. My stomach turned. To think this guy might have just saved my life. Here, take my cloak. He handed me his blue shroud. I didn't know what he wanted me to do with it. Go ahead, put it on. You want me to gut you right here? I quickly threw on the cloak. Go over to the tomb and open the door slowly. The blood keeper will surely take a swing at you. I gulped. We continued to listen. Just as he's about to end your life with a dagger of his, I'll swoop in and end his. Why? That's not part of the game. His eyes darted at me. Then he gave me a menacing smile. I just realized that I had constructed a full sentence for the first time in his presence. Right you are. Maybe I don't want to be a bloodlight.
Maybe I'm not here to play this ritualistic sport of theirs. Maybe what I truly am after is vengeance. He looked over at the tomb, then looked around the cemetery, probably to make sure no one was listening. Many years ago, the man in that tomb, the one that you know as the Blood Keeper, stole something from me, something I will never get back. The woman in that shack over there was not the Bloodlight's first sacrifice, not by far. The man in the tomb murdered my wife and took her blood for the sake of this game. It took me years to find him. It took me even longer to be accepted into their ranks, even as a lowly disciple. He stared off into the distance for a moment. I could see the pain in his eyes. But tonight is the night. The Blood Keeper must die in his own game, and spill blood like so many of the victims before him. Even though his actions were admirable, I still wanted no part of any of this. My life was still in danger. If you so much as take one step in the opposite direction and deviate from the plan, I will come over and kill you myself. Now get going. It seems I had no choice in the matter. His motives were blinding him from any sort of moral logic, just like in the shack when he stood by and watched the Blood Keeper kill that poor girl. He, of all people, should have made an effort to stop him, but no. The only thing on his mind was vengeance. And now I was tangled in an even larger mess than I was before. I did as I was told. I used the same method I did before, jumping from tree to tree, only now I didn't even bother being stealthy. The blue shroud protected my identity, and I had a feeling I might die tonight anyhow. What a waste of life. I made it to the side of the tomb. I stood there with my back to the cold, aged stone. My heart began racing again. I was about to come face to face with the Blood Keeper, a cold-hearted monster. I crept along the side of the tomb until I could finally see the front of it. I took a quick glance and noticed the tomb door was shut. I could see the blood runner that I'd met, waiting behind one of those trees near the tomb. I didn't hear him move even once, so it was hard for my mind to wrap itself around the idea of him getting from the tree branch we sat on to just a few yards away from me. His covertness was impressive. He just might be able to pull this off. My newfound confidence in the runner in no way lessened my fear of the Blood Keeper. I crouched over to the tomb door and stared at it. I guess it was now or never. I reached for the old, rusted handle slowly, so as not to tip off the Blood Keeper that I was there. I also may have been stalling just a bit, and after all, I was opening the door to what very well could be my death. Just as I was about to actually open the tomb, the door swung open and hit me straight in the head. I fell backward onto the ground. I must have suffered a concussion because everything seemed a little blurry, and I could feel myself losing consciousness. I looked up before I passed out. I could see the Blood Keeper standing before me in the moonlight. I was staring at the blurry vision of death, here to kill me and take the blood out of my racing heart. I blinked and saw another figure in my fuzzy state. I couldn't make out who it was, but one of them was thrusting his dagger into the other over and over. The prey, in his scuffle, fell to his knees, and then landed face first into the cold cemetery soil. The victor kept stabbing him. With each swing of his dagger, he seemed to become more and more furious. Because I could hear the piercing sound of metal through the flesh growing louder, I prayed that it was the Blood Keeper being torn apart. Otherwise, I was done for. I closed my eyes once again and passed out. "Are you all right there?" I heard an old man's voice say as I gradually began to open my eyes. "Are you okay?" I opened my eyes fully and looked at the voice speaking to me. It was the gravedigger. But how? Why? How? Where did they go? Was all I could manage to say. He looked puzzled. "Where did who go?" I couldn't wrap my head around any of this. What was going on? I should be dead. The gravedigger stared at me for a second, then changed his expression from confusion to sympathy. "Come now. Catch a cold out here." He invited me into the shack. Before I walked in, I noticed something. The newly dug grave that I had seen near the shack was gone. I really didn't know what to believe at this point, but I walked into the shack anyhow. The gravedigger, whose name I knew to be Pete, fed me and gave me a jacket to wear. In a frazzled state, I couldn't help but tell him everything that I'd seen. He didn't look surprised at all. I didn't even think to describe the man by the given titles, Blood Runner, Baron, etc., but Pete responded with, "Sounds like you had a run-in with the Blood Keeper." "That's him! How did you know about the Blood Keeper?" My jaw dropped in disbelief. "His spirit's been haunting this place for, over 100 years now, I suppose." I just glared at Pete, waiting for an explanation. He could tell that I was fatigued and confused, so he took time to elaborate. He must have talked non-stop for over an hour. I could tell I struck a nerve with his story. In a nutshell, the Bloodlights were a sadistic cult that formed in the late 1800s and started terrorizing the local community, binging on a heavy lust for blood. With each Bloodlight initiation brought more deaths. They would only use various cemeteries in the area as a field for their sport, digging a 6-foot hole each time, throwing the casualties or sacrifices in before they covered it back up. Who would look for the dead bodies in a graveyard? They racked up a death toll of over 50 victims before their games were brought to a halt. Things, however, went horribly wrong for the Bloodlights during what turned out to be their final game. An Englishman infiltrated their ranks and killed the Bloodkeeper that night, with the help of a young man. The young man was never identified. The local authorities were able to round up the rest of the Bloodlights soon after. The death of the Bloodkeeper left them leaderless and unorganized. After Pete explained everything, I couldn't help but sit there in awe. Did I relive what that young man went through that night? Or even wilder, was I that young man? Did I time travel? My logical mind immediately rejected the theory. I believe in the paranormal, but time travel is too far-fetched for me. In fact, until now, I tried to forget about that night. I could never wrap my head around it, and I still can't. Maybe, writing this, I can finally put this experience, much like the Bloodkeeper, to rest. The only thing that kept haunting me after I left the shack that night was the fuzzy images left in my mind before I had passed out. Though I can't fully differentiate who was who, I was almost certain it was the Bloodkeeper who was stabbing the man I was helping, albeit against my will. What if nothing supernatural happened here at all? And the gravedigger lied to me so I wouldn't divulge my story to anyone else, without sounding completely and utterly crazy? What if he was a Bloodlight too? I also could have sworn I saw a shovel on the ground right where the 6-foot hole used to be. What if... No, it can't be. They certainly would have killed me rather than construct an elaborate ruse to keep me quiet, right? I'm just paranoid. One thing's for sure, though. I'll never venture to any cemetery at night ever again. Whether or not the Bloodkeeper is dead, or still out there, making his rounds.
When a girl finally gets that ring, she's going to show it to her mother, her father, her grandmother.
Do you know that we forget most of our dreams? Psychologists have long since proven that we actually dream every time we fall asleep, though most of these dreams are forgotten as soon as we wake up. So the question here is, what's the point of having dreams if you can't remember them? Psychologists explain that this seemingly unreasonable forgetfulness is caused by the inactivity of some parts of the brain during sleep. But that is not the truth. The real reason is that we see and hear things in our dreams that are forbidden to the human perception. In other words, things that are simply too much to bear for our minds and soul, and if we don't forget about them, they drive us insane. However, should you wake someone up in the midst of a dream, he will remember every bit of the dream he is having. You should never do this, because it may kill him. To illustrate my point, let me tell you about a strange experience I had 3 years ago. I was living in an apartment in downtown Sydney at the time. My roommate was a man named David. When we first met each other, he told me that many people had refused to share a suite with him because of his especially loud sleep-talking, but I didn't mind. You see, I had served in the Navy for 5 years, and after over 1,800 nights of sleeping in a cabin right next to our ship's engine room, there was literally nothing loud enough to disturb me in my sleep. I told David so, and he was so pleased that he offered to pay 60% of the rent, which I gladly accepted. Our first 3 months together went extremely well. David was a great company. Not only was he a master cook, but a man of great compassion and humor as well. He wore the most friendly smile at all times and was always ready to engage in a pleasant conversation. As for his sleep-talking, well, frankly, I had to say that I heard none of it, because I am in the habit of going to bed before 11 p.m., while David usually stays up until 1 a.m. David would warn me never to wake him up while he's sleep-talking. I asked him why. I don't know. Instincts, I guess. He only shrugged. I agreed. With my usual schedule, it's not likely that I will ever get to hear him sleep-talk anyway. However, after a few more months, the World Cup began. Now, as I've already told you, I'm usually accustomed to going to bed early, but I'm also one of your typical soccer fans who are always willing to stay up late for a game. That night, I bought a bag of snacks and some beer, and invited David to join me in cheering for the Australian. Don't worry, man. I'll just ignore you. That seemed to reassure him. All right. Just remember, do not wake me up, whatever you hear. Sure. Good night. The game that night was awesome, so awesome that it made me forget all about David and his sleep-talking. However, at exactly 3 a.m. in the morning, a horrible moan from his room sent me bouncing off the sofa. It was the groan of souls trapped in hell, guttural, deep, and filled with despair. David's voice was pleasant and somewhat chirpy, but this was something else entirely. Keeping David's words in mind, I turned up the volume of the TV and tried to ignore the creepy groans coming out of his bedroom. It didn't work. The groans just grew louder and louder until they eventually merged into a steady, choked scream. Now you may wonder how I come to stay asleep with David making that much noise every night. But then again, that's because you've never been aboard a Navy warship. Have you ever heard the noise of a cruiser's engine? That was the loudest buzz anyone could imagine, booming like gunshots being fired right next to your ears. Now just think, as a Navy soldier, I'd spent 5 years living under that kind of noise. Now do you understand? After a while, when the groans had not stopped, I began to grow worried. What if David was having a heart attack and struggling for his life in the bedroom right now? I had to get in there and check on him. So I put down my beer and I ran towards his room. After knocking on the door for several times without getting any response, I turned the knob carefully and walked in. There lied David, with his face towards the door, and his expression was unspeakable. His bloodshot eyes seemed to be bulging out of his sockets.
and his lips were upturned like that of a wild animal, revealing gritted teeth. His tongue lolled out of his mouth, dangling like the tongue of a man who'd hanged himself with a rope. Seeing this sight of horror confirmed my suspicion that there had been something wrong with my roommate, and that I had to rush him to the hospital as soon as possible. That's when I made the mistake of trying to wake him up. Hey, buddy, wake up. What the hell's wrong with you? The change on his face was almost instant. The eyes narrowed, and the bloodshot was gone. His tongue retracted into his mouth, and for a moment, there was my friend again, staring blankly up at me as if dumbfounded. Then all of a sudden, he leaped from his bed and started screaming, "My God! I saw! What the fuck did I see? Oh God! Oh God!" He screamed as he banged his head against the wall so hard it drew blood. I tried in vain to get a hold of him, but he was astonishingly strong. "I saw them, Mark! Oh, I saw them in my dreams, these things! They talked to me in my dreams, I could see them so clearly, they tortured me, and oh fuck! Those damn eyes, these hands!" He collapsed into the fetal position on the floor, and began to weep like a boy. In the end, I called the hospital, and they sent someone to pick him up. 2 weeks later, I read in the local newspaper that David had committed suicide in a mental institution. He had been staying awake for over 80 hours when he died, banging himself in the head or biting down hard on his arms whenever he fell asleep. He was afraid of them, the beings that haunted him in his dreams. Now, because of me, he could remember. If you caught your friend having a bad dream, you can't wake him. His blood will be on your hands. I had moved out of the apartment. Now I'd rented a smaller suite on the opposite side of the street. It's a humble place. The facilities are generally unagreeable, but at least it's a suite that I can afford to rent by myself. You see, the problem is that I have begun to sleep talk as well. Last week, my roommate complained that I'd sometimes groan horribly in my sleep, and even beg and weep as if I was being tortured. And maybe, just maybe, they're now coming after me.